Every time I come here, I swear, it's like coming back for the very first time. The feelings I get from walking down and through these woods. This is Balquhiderock Wood. The clips you've seen before are some of what remains of the Dryfield of Balquhiderock, where the Scots army camped the night before the main Battle of Bannockburn. Now they came down through this wood. I have a string of films on the Battle of Bannockburn, but I also have quite a bit more to do, and today I wanted to focus on something specific to the battle, and that is the role of the archers on both sides. The English and Welsh archers on Edward II's side, and the Scottish archers on the side of King Robert the Bruce. And I want to look at how their roles affected the battle, the roles they could play and the roles they couldn't play or weren't allowed to play, because they were pivotal in many respects to Bruce's plan being achievable. When you walk through these woods, you are literally walking in the footsteps of the Scots soldiers in their thousands, who were about to do something extremely bold, unthinkable to the English. They were told to get themselves ready. 4 a.m, dawn, and they would make the silent march down through Balquhiderock Wood here. Now the woods were much more extensive in those days, but they would go through the woods and they would enter the Carse of Balquhiderock, where they would march forward. The objective, get as close to the English camp as possible. This was unthinkable to the English. What they expected, because their morale was high. They even partied the night before, some of them. They expected a fox hunt, to track Bruce down, to hunt him down, and to kill off his army, and to put down Bruce's rebellion once and for all. They never for 1 second thought that Robert the Bruce would take the fight to them. But he did. In 1314, Balquhiderock Woods covered this area towards the Carse. This is the route the Scots army would have taken towards the English camp. This is the English camp. Up here is the knoll. This is where King Edward II and his commanders watched the Scottish army. Now, here's the important part. Way yonder there is Balquhiderock Woods. Now, the Scots have a 60-foot backdrop coming down and out of that wood. So that in itself can conceal them, and it's very plausible that they can make half the distance before the English notice their presence. Now the English are camped. This is where the camp is. It doesn't go any further than this point here, because this is the pond. But they're 400 yards out of bowshot from Balquhiderock woods. Now that's important. When the Scots are spotted marching forward, coming this way, they throw the English archers, which are said to number between 2,000 to 3,000, possibly much more than that. English and Welsh warbowmen. But they're thrown out before the line, before the front line. And the front line all along here is occupied by the enemy English heavy cavalry. They get first go at having a go at the Scots, but because of this unexpected attack, Bruce is in the centre division. You see where that pylon is? Bruce's division, where that man is walking down, would have been right there. Douglas is over there on the Scottish right wing. Randolph, Earl of Moray, is away over the other side of those trees over there. The narrowest point from the Great Bend in the Bannockburn all the way across to the far side of these woods to the Pell Stream. The narrowest point is 830 yards. Now, Bruce's tactic was to enclose the English. He needed at least to get to 1,000 yards where he could close them in. And to do that, 2,000 to 3,000 heavy cavalry. Okay, they were not ready, but the horses were bitted and harnessed and ready to mount. And it says that the English mounted in great alarm. They were not ready. So meanwhile, they throw the archers out here. Now the archers start to fire on the Scots. And the Scots archers are thrown through the lines off their schiltrums, and they start to fire back. Lanarkos tells us that hadn't the Scots archers stopped firing, it would have gone badly for them. So the archery contest, a few were killed on each side, but it didn't last long, because it said that the English bows quickly put the Scots to flight. But here's the thing. They're not putting the Scots to flight, because meanwhile, as the Scots schiltrums are advancing, their archers are stopping to fire. They get so far. The Scots must have closed ranks. This is imperative to absorb a heavy cavalry charge. So the archers from the Scots side have done their job. They retreat through the Scots schiltrums lines, so that the Scots can form an unbroken line. Now the Scots they get approximately to 1,000 yards. Now you would need, if the numbers were only 5,000 Scots, that would mean 830 yards, which is half a mile. You would only have 5 lines of pikes to deal with not only the charge from 3,000 heavy cavalry, but from the 17,000 foot soldiers that are behind them, all camped here in front of the knoll and on either side of the knoll. Remember, Edward and his commanders are watching up there. After the archery duel is over, to begin the battle, the English mount Gloucester, who is on the knoll. On this side, how do we know that? Because he was brought down by Douglas's schiltrum. He doesn't even wait to don his armour. He knows that the Scots are closing ground, so when the Scots get to about 1,000 yards, they kneel down and they set the butts of their pikes into the ground. The English think they're praying. They're not. The pikes, the ground must take the impact of the pikes. The pikes are designed to break. But when there's English confusion, the Scots see this, and Douglas is said to have ran and closed off more ground. The more ground they close, the more lives they save. And just where that hedge is at the beginning is where Gloucester ran into Douglas, and he was brought down by the common men of that army. And his retinue of army look on here in disbelief, and they see this prestigious knight slain by common men. So the English archers retreat behind their own lines. You are now in the front line of the battlefield. This is the killing fields. This pond here is omnipresent. It's an invariant for the period. It's on the earliest maps going back to Thomas Jeffreys and General Roy, as is the knoll over there. It's on the maps of 1750 and of 1746. That's a 60 high point vantage view for the English commanders, and we will go and take a look at that. The weather's not too kind as far as filming purposes are concerned today, but when you think this is May, almost early June, so we're not far off Midsummer's Day, and this grass perhaps might have been just a little bit longer at the time with what the men were marching through. You're now in the Scots Centre Division. They came in 3 great schiltrams. That's what all the English sources tell us. And some of them were written within a year of the battle. Bruce fought here. The centre was slightly behind the 2 wings on either side. So what you're approaching now is where you would have had, because Bruce was able to pen in the English. Now, to pen in English, he had to have the numbers available and the confidence in those numbers that his plan would work. He needed at least 10,000 men to be able to do that. 20,000 would be more like it. That's 20 lines of pikes deep to absorb the cavalry charge coming this way. Now remember, each horse and rider weigh a ton. If you have 830 yards, each knight to a yard, charging you along all of that front, if you understand the momentum, the mass, the velocity and force of 1 ton side by side crashing into those lines of pikes, they need to have enough men to absorb that charge and hold them. Now, it's said there was jamming for a while. So a knight on his horse is about 10 foot high on average. You're right in the centre line. You can just see the pond just over that dip there. Now, there are many ponds here in very wet weather. How do we know it was wet weather? Because the source Trocolo tells us that the battle was fought among the pools. Water gathers in the undulations of the ground, which is perfect camp for the English. They did not camp in a bog. The Carse is hard ground. One of the sources even tell us that they made their way down to the Carse where they were to bivouac for that night. So it was they'd camped here before. Charge after charge. There was a great jamming for a while. All the sources tell us that. There was no movement for a while. So the Scots pikes, kneeling about here, managed to absorb the cavalry charge. So there was a great jamming all around here. No movement. It says there was a terrible sound of crushed spears and destriers wounded to the death. Now Baker, writing in 1341, the Baker's Chronicle tells us the death of many knights. And those knights, the death of those knights were accountable because English archers had to fire in a high parabola, and some of the arrows came down and killed their own men. Friendly fire. They were ordered to stop firing. So when you have a barrier of 10 foot knights, 2,000 to 3,000 of them in front of you, the leading division is in the way and none of the foot soldiers can get into the fight. And even if you have a thin ribbon of Scots pikes, 20 men deep, those are extremely difficult to hit. Whereas the Scots archers behind the schiltrams, they have a sitting target. For the knights that were not pulled down off their horses, their visors lifted, and receiving an axe or the dagger to the head, they were sitting ducks for the Scots archers. Thus the Scots archers, because of the confinement between the two streams, the Bannockburn and the Pell stream, the English could not manoeuvre. They had zero mobility. They needed 100 yards anyway to get up their maximum momentum of 20 miles per hour. When the Scots narrowed that to around 60 yards, they effectively disabled the English cavalry. Now what you see now is it's just a trickle today. As you can see, it's quite deep going into the grounds. The banks are quite deep, but this trickle today is what remains of the Pell stream. Before the Pell stream was culverted in modern times, it was a formidable burn because it says that the English were trapped between the two bounding streams. These woods weren't here, but what you have here now is you're on the Scottish left wing. This is under the charge of Thomas Randolph, the Earl of Moray, and all the retinues that would have marched forward with Moray, including the Keith clan. Remember, all of the Scots fought on foot. We know this because all of the relevant sources, there are 9 of them, there are 5 great ones, some written within a year of the battle, specifically mention that all of the Scots fought on foot. There were no Scottish cavalry. The only mention of Scottish cavalry appears 63 years after the battle in Barber's account. Too much time elapsed for new information. The other sources are absolutely, and they're all independent, are absolutely adamant that the Scots fought on foot, and that was Bruce's masterstroke. So they march over here. The knoll is behind those trees, and all of this ground here on the Scots left wing. So when you think of the ground that we've covered and the amount of men it would take to have an unbroken line, you're definitely talking about a real upper bound for the Scottish army. Much more than 5,000 or 6,000 men who could not withhold a cavalry charge. 2,000 to 3,000 strong. And we know that they closed off the narrowest point of the Carse and rendered them ineffective. From those cattle there, this is the line of the Pell stream. Goes straight along there. It goes behind the meat market that's up there now, and the Bannockburn and the Pell stream meet at the confluence of the River Forth, which is way behind there. From those cattle there, this is the line of the Pell stream. Goes straight along there. It goes behind the meat market that's up there now, and the Bannockburn and the Pell stream meet at the confluence of the River Forth, which is way behind there. Part of the fun exploring the Battle of Bannockburn and Scottish history in general, I mean, for me, is you have to get way off the beaten track and into some really, in some ways, impenetrable places. At this time of year, this is exceptionally overgrown, but we're heading up onto the knoll. I'm gonna get stung to pieces here amongst this stuff, but you know, as I say, it has to be done. Has to be done. I would never, probably in this, unless someone wanted to bring them a tour around this particular part, but it does give you a great insight once we get to where we're going of seeing the battlefront from the English perspective. No one comes here, and I know no one comes here because it is absolutely trackless, but it's quite dangerous. All of this bit here is dangerous footing, it's dangerous underfoot, and we really need to take a good deal of care in where we're going here. But I really want to get to this bit. I really want to show you what the English commanders and what King Edward saw, and just how relevant the English position is. So what you can see here, we are on one of the high points of the knoll. You'll remember that pylon out there. There's the omnipresent pond, the invariant for the period. So the English camp did not go further than the pond. Balquhiderock Woods, where the Scots descended, away in the distance. So in front of the pond, you have the front line. That's where Robert the Bruce led his division in the centre. Way over to the left there, if you can see through the trees. I'll take you down in a moment. I just want you to get some sort of idea of the height. The Black Douglas was over there, the good Sir James Douglas, and Randolph, out of sight here of the woods where we've just travelled from, was away on the Scottish left. But King Edward would have got a great view overseeing his whole camp, but also the Scots' advance. And with all that cavalry lying out front, bitted and harnessed. Now, it was common knowledge, and some of the chroniclers put shame on the English army to say that they were sodden with drink, that they were crying, "Drink hail and wassail." Now, they wouldn't all have been like that, but certainly that tells us that they were confident. They were overconfident, and they expected that fox hunt of rebels in the morning. So even down here at the base of the knoll, you're getting a marvellous glimpse of the battlefield, the sight on day 2. Even at this height, the view you get is fantastic from a commander's perspective. You can oversee the whole army, all the left wing over there and around the back of the knoll, and directly in front. And over there, remember those trees were not there. So the Scottish army would have been coming. Now when you consider, this is why I wanted you to see this part, when you consider from this left to centre, all the way along to the right, when you consider the amount of Scots pikemen that would have taken unbroken to absorb a cavalry charge, that needs more than 5 lines of pikes, because they would have been absolutely demolished by those equine tanks. Robert the Bruce needed archers. He knew that the main problem with an army of Edward II's size, over 20,000, was on the approach. That was the main problem, because he knew that he was going to run into, he was going to be seen at some point, and once the army was discovered, that most surely the English archers would let their volleys go, and every arrow was death. These soldiers were absolutely lethal in their own right. So he had to compensate for that. He had a year to prepare for this battle. He would have trained archers up. He would have had the required number of men in an unbroken line to come out and fulfill his plan. And it worked. It worked. Not only did he close, so when you see the end of that hedge out there, that's where Gloucester was killed by Douglas's division. I mean, you think of all that thin ribbon of men, 20 men deep, along the Carse over there. That's a formidable force. And when you also think, if the archers, the English archers, are down here, and you have all along that centre front, there, all along that centre front, you have the jamming of all the cavalry. Now the cavalry couldn't move. They couldn't retreat, they could not go forward, they could not go to the sides to outflank or anything. They were caught in their own gory bed. They were caught in a death trap. So the archers, the English archers trying to fire, had to fire up the way in a high parabola over a 10-foot target, and they were unsuccessful in doing that. So the Scots ranks at 20 men deep, assuming the Scots army was 20,000 strong. Most of those arrows would have hit their own men in the back. English archers rendered ineffective because they could not move out to the flanks. Baker tells us, again, writing in 1341, that they learned from this battle because customary at the time, the English archers were behind the heavy cavalry, but after that, when you look at the battles of Halidon Hill under Edward III, archers were positioned on the flanks. The English never made that mistake again. The archers needed to be able to deploy to the sides to be effective. But this is the English view. This is the English camp directly in front of you. You'll see that swan just out there, just beyond that, where that train's going by. That's the killing fields, folks. This is actually one of my favourite parts of the battlefield, but it's treacherous coming through here at this part. You can look at it and get a good view from it down there, but I just like getting my hands dirty, and but I do love that area. I think you have to see what King Edward II saw, and he was really surprised when he saw the Scots come. And what a terrifying sight that must have been. It says the Scots assembled in all their strength. Doesn't sound like a small army. It says that the destriers crashed into a dense forest of pikes. Not a small army. A small army could not carry that out. It's impossible. And remember, the battle was fought here in the camp. No sources ever mention that the English got out of their camp, and that's because they didn't. They were caught completely unawares, by surprise, and Bruce pulled a masterstroke. Was it a gamble? Of course it was. The country's at stake, slavery is at stake, dominion is at stake. For such a charismatic leader as Bruce, in a population that's believed to be 400,000 back then, half of which would have been men, half of which again would have been fighting men. If he can only field 6,000, where are the other 94,000 men? Okay, granted, not everyone would have been a Bruce supporter and come for the Bruce cause, people in faraway parts of the land. But he would have fielded much more than that, and with a year to prepare, Bruce had a strong army. Even when he was harassing the territory of Buchan, he was reported to have had a strong army. Edward was astonished. Well done, Scots, fight, he said. They thought they were kneeling for mercy. And of course, that's what the English clergy would have thought, that were standing with them. But no, they were setting their butts in the pike of the ground, their pikes in the butt of the ground. One purpose, to break, to absorb the energy of the cavalry charge. If a man tried to absorb that, he'd have went over. A mass of broken bones, destriers crashing around. Even if he speared them, it would have been carnage. But the ground had to take the charge. That was the function of the pikes. English archers would have, because they couldn't get into the fight after the cavalry had jammed up, and the foot soldiers pressing behind, pushing, shoving, really creating a death trap for the knights. Once the Scots had killed the horses and the knights and broke through, that's when the rout would have taken place. The English archers would have been just like any other foot soldier. And because they'd crossed the Bannockburn the day before, remember, we know it was wet weather, they'd have made the banks of the Bannockburn quite muddy. And once this rout started to take place and they attempted to recross it, it would have been absolutely treacherous. It's important to realise just how devastating a bow was. And I'm not only talking about the longbow, we know how lethal the longbow was. If you want to find out more about the longbow, look no further than Robert Hardy's book on the longbow. It's fascinating. But at close range, when you think of the Scottish archers that were intermingled in behind the main Sheltrams, here, right here, on this killing ground, and you have the knights at a 10-foot hut target, they'd have been shot to pieces. Whereas the English archers, way on the far side up here, neither had the room to move, load, aim, or fire. They were rendered useless. And once the Scots had broke through, I sometimes wonder if Edward had looked Bruce in the eyes and vice versa. Even if they got that close, maybe they did, before Edward left the field, that he knew his army was in pieces.
just wanted to show you what the Bannockburn's like after some wet weather. Now, it's only been raining most of the night, and already the Bannockburn here at the Great Bend is in quite a flow. You know, it goes away under the motorway of the A1 and it comes back in itself and it meets the Pearl stream behind the knoll. But this is the Great Bend. From here, straight across the Carse to the Pearl stream, the narrowest point is 831 yards. This is the front line on the right wing, commanded by James the Black Douglas, and this is where not only Gloucester was killed, but after the rout had taken place, after the main part of the killing was over, then it became the massacre. So it wasn't a battle anymore, it was a rout. The English army fled, they dispersed. Many of them came this way. It tells us that they tried to recross the Bannockburn. Now, crossing this from the day before would have been treacherous in itself, but there is a crossing point just up there. But in mass panic, they've tried to recross here, and the banks of the burn here would have been muddy, they would have been slippy. You can see, particularly as you go around the bend there, the banks are particularly high for climbing out of the burn. It would have been a death trap. English soldiers would have been speared, axed, had their throats cut, killed at close quarters. A very few would have made it, some would have, but very few would have made it over the Bannockburn and south to safety. Not necessarily to safety, it says that even some of the women folks managed to corner, capture and kill some of the fleeing English soldiers. It's a long way from home in hostile territory. But the chronicles say about the nameless and the faceless, the people that we'll never know, that perished here, that saw their last when being pursued by the Scots enemy. No one is kind to an invader, and the rout of this battle would have been a bloody end for those who were in retreat. Some people made it home. King Edward certainly made it home. He was led off the field by Giles d'Argentan and Henry de Beaumont, among others. That great mercenary Giles d'Argentan would return and he would be slain by the Scots pikes. The Scots archers now would have been normal soldiers, that's possible that they kept their bows or they picked up pikes, but the archers played a very prominent battle. When you have an elite English army, their archers, apart from the heavy cavalry, were in many ways their pride and joy. Archery was a law to be practiced, but for Bruce's tactic to pen them in where the archers were ineffective and the Scotch archers were super effective at point blank range, really swung the battle in the early stages, because Bruce had to close off the ground. He had to achieve that, and he managed that, and through that master stroke alone, penning the English in between the Bannockburn and the Pearl stream, denying them any movement, he pulled off the greatest military achievement in our time. Thanks for walking in the footsteps, people, and for sharing the experience with me. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel, comment, share. I'll be very happy to hear from you.